Okay, so this is topic two of information system security. We're going to be talking about project management. Um, the readings associated with this, chapters 2, 6, and 8 from the NIST special publication 800-12, which is I copied out to the Moodle site. There's also a couple other things to take a look at. There's a link to another paper basically focused on information security aligned to enterprise management. Couple of videos as well, security management processes, as well as introduction to computer security. Both of these videos give you a pretty good perspective of what we're um, looking at in terms of this idea of a project focused, or using a project methodology to implement a security model. All right, the first part, in our first lecture, we talked about some of the different threats, some of the different approaches that a a hacker will use against an organization. There's, a lot of this stuff is the body of knowledge that's been evolved over some period of time. Uh, you know, is fairly robust. All right, so so the question is, as we kind of start into this, looking at this topic, is how do you we know what we have to protect against. The question then becomes um, how do we best organize ourselves to be able to cope with this stuff. All right. And there's a couple of different things, like the approach. One approach is kind of what we're going to be talking about here. Is the idea of kind of adapting uh, a project planning or a project management sort of approach to move forward with the idea of applying security or protecting the IT assets of an organization. So this idea of portfolio management is a starting point. The idea of um, the idea of managing the different assets that the organization uses in terms of has and uses in terms of IT. The idea is, what you want to do is you want to increase your value of your return on investment. IT tends to be a very high, fairly pricey item, so you really want to ensure that you're getting maximum investment. But at the same token, you also want to be effectively managing it, because the more diverse, the more pieces, the more different types of things you have in your in your IT portfolio, the more really more risk is associated with that. So the idea of what we're looking at with this management, portfolio management, is that establish a life cycle around the dealing of how we deal with IT assets and IT resources, and also understanding that there's a limitation, like anything else. There's a we do not have limited organizations do not have unlimited resources. So the idea of a budget constraint being effective within that um, is always a big driver. Uh, so part of what we're doing within a portfolio management would be you check out things like value propositions, cost benefits, risks, and um, strategic alignment objectives. So really, what you do is you take a look at everything you've got, you're investing in terms of technology, and then you go back and be able to articulate what are the why do you have it, what's it doing there, what is the value proposition, what's what value um, is to be derived from its utilization, and kind of what its what would be the expected life cycle. All right. So, this is a dynamic situation. So we've got a whole bunch of things going on in terms of changing business needs, different product offerings. Basically, we work in competitive environments, so we've got to deal with both with customers and suppliers and competitors. A whole bunch of things that are all regulatory environments, depending upon where you're at and the type of businesses you're in. So there's a whole bunch of different factors that need to be taken into consideration when trying to deal with IT investments. How do you what do you want to get? Why are you doing it? So from us, looking at this as we align this up with a computer security program, there's a couple things we want to take a look at here. Number one is what should we incorporate, what should we include in a computer security program? So first and foremost, supports the organizational mission. Has to be aligned with what are we doing, why are we doing it. Also, it needs to be understood that it is an integral element of a sound management. We're not doing security for the sport of it. It's actually the the driver on this is to be we do this because this is what in order to effectively manage the assets that we have at our disposal. you know Security requires us to make sure that our IT assets are secure. Um, Security should be cost effective, and identifying responsibilities and accountability should be explicit. One of the big challenges, as we look at this stuff and we try to deal with this idea of kind of an amorphous, threat, that you can't really. In some times it's hard to articulate or try to identify. One of the big challenges is how do you cope with that is really kind of being very explicit across the board. So one dimension of being of what you would want to call out would be both what are security responsibilities and accountability within the organization. Um, the idea also that security, system owners, there are security responsibilities that really it kind of span across the entire enterprise. So it's not just simply organizational security is not something that is an isolated. Each organization is responsible for its own. There's that's true. Each organization is responsibility for its own, but it's also a collective group because basically the weakest link, the concept of a weakest link, whoever is the weakest link in an organization, is something that has to be dealt with. It requires a comprehensive and integrated approach. As we talk about, kind of being explicit, also being comprehensive, and understanding the breadth and depth of what security is all about. Needs to be periodically reassessed. So it is a living, honest to goodness, real thing. It's not simply it's not a rote exercise. It's something that needs to be adaptable, to what the organization is doing and kind of where the organization is going. And finally, there's societal factors. So the idea of security is there's certain things that need to be taken into consideration. When dealing with IT security that relates to kind of things like around kind of from a societal perspective or drivers um, that come into play. Mm. So that's that is kind of our kind of what the elements of a security program. What's the program itself? So basically, what a security program is supposed to do is it manages computer security at multiple levels, right, of an organization. And there's different. The idea of a central, and it's not a monolithic thing. It actually comes in different dimensions and kind of in uh, different aspects to it. So one is this idea of a central computer security program, kind of a core um, program that it kind of addresses the overall management of security within the organization, and then system level, and then also system level programs. So the idea of being able to not just simply dealing with stuff on a centralized basis, but actually being focused on issues requirements at a local level as well. So, and the challenge is a lot of times is coordinating, the integration of both the systems level stuff into a uh, central computer security program. The challenge with security is that uh, the attacker only has to, the attacker only has to be successful once, whereas the organization that's doing the defense needs to be, successful all the time. Um, so the idea of integrating or kind of weaving both a central security program with system level programs, kind of, because really it's wherever your weakest link is, wherever you have a very strong central, and all it takes is one organization outside that could um, jeopardize the whole. So it's not, it's, it's a complex, undertaking because it operates at multiple levels, across an organization. So a couple of attributes. These are some of the different elements we look at. You want it's a stable program. You want to have a core. Um, an organization that's funded, that has stability, that has objectives um, and tasks with clearly defined within the organization, both from a program perspective and from a resource perspective. You don't want to. It's not the type of thing where you decide that okay, this year we'll create an organization and next year we'll get rid of it. It's something that's just it's part of doing business. Um, Definitions of policies and mission and function statements of this. Not only is it a organization, but it's a defined organization with policy statements and strategies and programs, um, all defined, basically signed off on by the executives. So this is not an optional thing. Basically, it is an intrinsic part, a fundamental part of what the organization. A well doing this stuff correctly requires that that organization makes these types of investments, um, and establishes the norms and the policies and the functions that you need to in order to be successful. So some systems, basically this is we use some of the stuff from a central side, the elements of the central of a central policy of a central program, and this is conversely kind of what you would see at a systems level. So security plans. So this is really the kind of the centralized kind of foundational stuff, whereas this becomes a kind of a systems level. The idea is structure. The idea of establishing you know security policies, the idea of a life cycle. This thing operates on an ongoing basis. And it is aligned and integrated with systems operations. So IT investment alignment. The idea, you would define this as it's the alignment of both, um, the projects, different activities ongoing, with mission needs, including basically cybersecurity. So the idea is that this is IT security needs to be a part of an ongoing activity. There's a ongoing projects. It's a living thing. Um, Also, dealing with that is also the fact that we operate under constraints, IT constraints. So it's not, you don't have unlimited resources to do it. So things have to be dealt with in such a fashion, based on this idea of a risk model where, the most impactful um, risks are the ones that are, priority is given on mitigating those. So there's a couple different kind of IT investments. The reasons we kind of how we do IT investments. So one is going to be investments to cut costs, increase throughput. Um, those applications or investments that we make for for accounting and reporting, compliance analysis. Um, in some cases, there's the idea of the IT um, resources that we invest in will give us give an organization some type of competitive advantage, or the idea of a um, you know, providing the platform for future business initiatives. So there's a bunch of different reasons we will make investments in IT, and all these have there's a security aspect associated with all of them. talking about this idea of a resource asset management. So, IT computer resources, what this describes is really the different computing resources that basically that are in play all across the organization, and why do we have them? Theoretically, you should not have IT assets that does not have a particular purpose in an organization. All right, so what is that? What are the purposes and what is the life cycle associated with that? So it's this idea of tracking all of these assets. So these includes hardware, software, networking, organizational data sources, things like that, across the organization, so you can understand and articulate and manage this stuff. Um, Sounds simple, but it is actually pretty tricky sometimes, especially the larger and more complex your organization is. Trying to stay on top of this stuff, being able to develop an effective means of watching and managing this stuff. Um, and the idea also of the interaction between people, assets, processes, um, you know, leveraging technology, and how this stuff kind of fits. All right, so there's a model out here under CERT. So, what CERT is a organization associated with, I think, Carnegie Mellon University, which is out in Pittsburgh. Uh, called Octave, which stands for Operationally Critical Threat Asset Vulnerability Evaluation and Asset Driven Evaluation Approach. So it's a model that this idea of Octave is a model that's used to help kind of work your help you work your way through this the processes associated with resource asset management. Economic IT decision making, this idea of you make a decision based upon what's a value proposition or some sort of idea of a doing some sort of calculation. So cost benefit analysis. You know, a lot of times you just simply just what's our what for basically creating a model that says, okay, these are your costs and here's what our associated benefits are. So it's a provides a financial justification. You compare estimated cost with anticipated benefits. A couple things you include in these things. The assumptions. What are the unknowns. There are known there are known unknowns. And the idea of identifying these things as risks and constraints. What are the different types of risks that are out there? What are the weights of those risks? The idea of a vulnerability plus a threat, and with the outcome kind of is used as a basis for a calculation. Um, so the idea is really, as best you can. And this is once again, this is not an exact science, but it also is a, if you can do this in a rigorous fashion, you can, kind of identify, what are the values from to be derived from the investments in IT. So the idea is kind of creating a, a, a consistent model, a rigorous model that you can go back and say, to justify your business decisions around this. Because this is all, investments in technology ultimately become business decisions. They're not, it's not because it's the coolest technology, it's because there's a value associated with the technology that's, used by a business. Project budgeting, interdependencies, the idea of all of the different cost, organizational benefits, risks, uncertainty. This is all of the stuff that goes into kind of this business model. So this approach here is something that they call an AHP, analytical hierarchy process. It's really, once again, it's a decision making framework. So it just is a means by which you can a model that you can kind of analyze a particular situation, kind of do an evaluation with some basis of and measuring and doing some sort of estimation of what potential outcomes would be. So this is kind of a picture of it's a lot of these models. It's not like these things will give you an exact the outcome of these models analysis is not going to be here's your final answer. It really is kind of an evaluation, which then becomes part, it gets factored into a decision making process. So in and of itself, it's just simply a tool and part of it, larger objectives of making decisions. And just a kind of another example here. This idea of taking different perspectives, different corporate corporate contributions, future perspectives, stakeholder perspectives, kind of blending this all together. The idea of kind of defining, what is the overall value associated. Um, you know, Balanced scorecard is is a is an analytics technique. You see it in organizations basically being able to apply a methodology to be able to do a um, give you some sense of what's happening in an organization with regard to different activities, different outcomes, what's happening. So this actually becomes a lot of organizations have used balanced scorecards as a means of being able to track what's going on. Just another example here, kind of another model here, this idea of a kind of balancing risks and constraints. Kind of this is a sometimes you get, as I said, you look at some of these models and you get the idea that this is a an absolute. It's not, you know we do not want to give the um, that this stuff is an absolute science, but it is a means by which tools and techniques that can help drive decision making. Similar in that fashion, multi-criteria decision making, and decision analysis. Once again, a model. These are all modeling approaches. So the idea is, what's the value or the benefit, of a potential IT project. Not just simply measuring economic values, but also what are other alternatives, and what are basically what are the potential outcomes. The idea of what it will use is as a combination of different techniques, enhance business value decision analysis. Uh, the idea is that it's really supposed to be a as a means of structuring your best outcomes, your decision outcomes, alternatives. Which can be a fairly complicated. A lot of potential alternatives that need to be weighed and evaluated. So it does give you kind of an ability, once again, not absolute, but it gives you an ability to kind of structure up a decision making process. And that is everything we need to know about computer security program.